Vinland is nigh!
Behind the familiar version of history, other possible trajectories are always hiding. We are accustomed to thinking that the discovery of America was a triumph of the Renaissance, the feat of Christopher Columbus in 1492. This moment became the starting point that launched globalization and the Columbian Exchange, forever connecting the old and new worlds. However, the history of the first European contact with this continent occurred almost 5 centuries earlier. Around 1000 AD, Norse seafarers, led by Leif Erikson, reached shores they called Vinland. This is not a myth. Archaeological finds at Lonso Meadows in Newfoundland confirm the reality of these events. We know they were there, but their presence was fleeting. A few short expeditions, clashes with the indigenous population, whom they called Skrælings, and logistical difficulties forced them to leave these shores. The Greenland colony, their staging ground, was itself teetering on the brink of survival and could not support a large-scale settlement. For 5 centuries, America was once again plunged into isolation from Europe. But why did they fail? The reasons lie in a lack of resources, an absence of political will, and the small number of the colonists themselves. These were private ventures, not state-sponsored expansion. But what if this fundamental factor had changed? What if, instead of a dozen adventurers, a whole fleet driven by desperation and the will to build a new home had set out for Vinland? This is a scenario in which one surviving colony changes the fate of 2 continents. Watch this video to the end, and you will find out how history could have changed. Let's try to trace the real trajectory of events. Leif Erikson's discovery of Vinland around 1000 AD was not an accident, but a logical westward step in the chain of Norse expansion, following Iceland and Greenland. The settlement found at Lonso Meadows in Newfoundland was a small camp. A few turf longhouses, a forge, and a workshop for ship repairs. It was a base for exploration and overwintering, likely designed for a few dozen people. Subsequent expeditions, like the one led by Thorfinn Karlsefni, were more ambitious, including women and livestock, which indicates an intent to found a permanent colony. However, this enterprise was doomed from the start, and the reason lay in logistics. The base for settling Vinland was Greenland, founded by Leif's father, Eric the Red. But Greenland itself was an outpost at the very limit of survival. It was a sparse, cold plateau, barely able to feed a few thousand people. The Greenlanders could offer Vinland neither demographic resources nor food support. They themselves desperately needed timber from Vinland and trade with Iceland to survive. The colonists in Vinland found themselves in double isolation. The small size of the groups traveling to Vinland made them vulnerable. Contacts with the native population, the Skrælings, likely ancestors of the Beothuk or Mi'kmaq tribes, quickly escalated from wary trading to open skirmishes. The sagas describe clashes in which the Norse, despite their advantage in iron weapons, took losses and realized they were a minority in a vast alien land. Seeing no prospects for a peaceful life and lacking the military power to conquer, the settlers made a logical decision. After just a few years, they loaded their ships with furs and timber and left these shores forever. Vinland remained only a line in the sagas, a vague memory. The Greenland colony, cut off from Europe by the Little Ice Age, slowly faded and vanished by the 15th century. For 500 years, no one in Europe remembered the lands beyond the sunset. This failure was predetermined by the weakness of their logistical base and the absence of a critical mass of settlers. But history often turns on the smallest changes in initial conditions. We do not know for sure what would have awaited the Vikings had they stayed, but we can speculate on how events might have unfolded if history had taken a different path. Subscribe so you don't miss other alternative versions of history. What if events in Scandinavia itself had turned out differently? The beginning of the 11th century was not an era of dark age stagnation, but an era of vibrant energy. The Viking Age in Scandinavia was ending, but its inertia was still strong. Norwegians, Danes, and Swedes were creating dynasties in England, founding states in Rus, serving in the Byzantine Emperor's Guard and colonizing the ocean islands of Iceland and Greenland. This was a society at the peak of its dynamism, but it was also on the verge of great change. The centralization of power by kings and forced Christianization. At the same time, North America was by no means an empty continent. By 1000 AD, hundreds of cultures were thriving here. In the Mississippi Valley, the so-called Mississippian culture was rising, building enormous earthen mounds. Its center, the city of Cahokia, near modern-day St. Louis, would at its peak have up to 20,000 inhabitants, larger than contemporary London. These civilizations possessed complex social structures and developed agriculture, but they lacked several key elements that the Norse had: iron metallurgy, the wheel for transport, draft animals, and immunity to Old World diseases. In our history, the resistance of the old pagan nobility to centralization was broken. But let us imagine a different situation based on the real politics of the time. In Norway in the 1010s, 1020s, King Olaf II, later St. Olaf, forcibly united the country and imposed Christianity, breaking the back of the old pagan aristocracy. Many powerful jarls and chieftains, gaudy, lost everything: lands, influence, and sometimes their lives. In our history, they fled to Iceland, to Rus, or submitted. But now let us suppose that a group of powerful pagan jarls from Western Norway, having been defeated, makes a different choice. At this very moment, Leif Erikson's men return from Greenland with tales of a boundless, fertile wineland to the west, rich in timber and pastures with almost no people. For the disgraced jarls, this is not just an opportunity, it is salvation. It is a chance to build a new world by the old rules, far from the cross and the king. Instead of Thorfinn Karlsefni's 3 ships, in 1020, a fleet of 30 drakars and nars sails west from the fjords of Norway, bypassing Iceland. This is not an exploratory expedition, it is an exodus. On board are not 150, but 2,000 to 3,000 people. Warriors with their families, weaponsmiths, blacksmiths, carpenters, thralls, slaves, and crucially, several uncompromising pagan priests. Goody. They bring with them not only sheep and cows, but also war horses, reserves of iron, and a firm intention never to return. They land south of Lonceau Meadows in a more favorable climate, perhaps at the mouth of the St. Lawrence River. They immediately build not a temporary camp, but a powerful fortified fortress town, Vestri Holmgaarder, Western Holmgaard. This fleet brought to America the political will and the demographic critical mass necessary for survival. The founding of Vestri Holmgaarder, Vestheim, immediately changes the entire dynamic of settlement. The first decades are a harsh struggle for survival, but with different initial conditions. A critical mass of several thousand people, including hundreds of experienced warriors, is no longer a handful of adventurers. It is a force capable of defending itself, clearing land for fields, and immediately beginning the construction of permanent dwellings and fortifications. They brought with them familiar European crops, rye and barley, as well as livestock. The abundance of pasture and fertile land, compared to meager Greenland, ensures food security within the first few harvest years. Contacts with the indigenous population, the Skraelings, are inevitable, but now the balance of power is different. 2,000 organized, well-armed warriors, possessing iron swords, chainmail, and axes, represent a force that scattered hunter-gatherer tribes of the Stone Age cannot overcome. The Norse, using their tactical advantage, the shield wall formation, and their mobility on the rivers, thanks to drakars, quickly seized control of the coast and river valleys. Some of the native tribes retreat deeper into the continent, carrying tales of fierce, bearded invaders. Soon, a more complex model of interaction also forms. Barter trade begins. The Norse offer iron goods, knives, axes, nails, in exchange for furs, which become the new colony's main export commodity. As was always the case in Viking history, the taking of captives also begins. Skraeling women and children become thralls or slaves in the new settlements. This launches a slow but irreversible process of intermingling. The first generation of people born in America, but of mixed blood, appears. The most important consequence is that the colony immediately establishes a permanent logistical connection with Greenland. Now the Greenland colony, which in our history faded by the 15th century, receives vital resources from Vinland, structural timber for ships and houses, as well as surplus grain. Greenland is transformed from a dead-end outpost into a thriving and strategically important transit hub, a bridge between Europe and Vinland. Along this bridge, a new, albeit thin stream of migrants flows west, Icelanders seeking better land, and new dissidents from an increasingly Christianized Norway. The basis for the survival and subsequent dominance of the Western Shore colony was the technological package transferred from Europe. The key element was metallurgy. The Norse brought with them knowledge of the bloomery process. After discovering local sources of bog iron, the blacksmiths of Vestri Holmgaard immediately established its extraction and processing in simple bloomery furnaces. This meant the constant, renewable production of the most important resource: iron plowshares for agriculture, axes for clearing forests, rivets and nails for ships, and of course weapons, spearheads, arrowheads, and swords. Architecture and fortification also followed Scandinavian models, but adapted to local resources. Instead of stone, which was the primary building material in Greenland, here there was an endless supply of timber. The settlements, or guards, were built as timber and earthwork fortresses. They were surrounded by a high palisade of logs, an earthen rampart, and a ditch. Inside were not single huts, but the famous longhouses, langhus, where entire clans, their servants and livestock, lived under one roof during the winter. The colonists' warfare was based on infantry. Although they brought horses, heavy cavalry was useless in the dense forests of North America. The core of the army remained the herd, the household retinue, and the militia of freemen, bondi, armed with spears, the famous Danish axes, breduk, and swords. But the main instrument for the projection of power became the fleet. Vinland's shipwrights immediately appreciated the abundance of quality timber and began building ships adapted to local conditions. These were not only ocean-going gnars for trade with Greenland, but also maneuverable drakkers with shallow drafts, inherited from their ancestors. These ships became the key to the continent. Just as their kin in Rus used the river routes of the Dnieper and the Volga, the Vinlanders began to penetrate deep into the continent via the St. Lawrence and other major rivers, reaching the Great Lakes. The rivers became their highways. Drakkars allowed them to launch swift raids, control trade routes, and establish new fortified outposts hundreds of kilometers from the coast. This gave them a strategic mobility unavailable to the native tribes, who used only canoes, and allowed them to control the fur trade at its very source. Let's imagine for a minute how the continent itself would have changed. The appearance of a stable source of iron had colossal consequences for the indigenous peoples of North America. Technological seepage was inevitable. The native tribes, primarily the ancestors of the Iroquois and Algonquians, could not produce iron themselves. Metallurgy is too complex a process, requiring knowledge and resources. But they could obtain it through trade, exchanging furs for knives and axes, or in battle. An Iron Age begins for Native Americans, but it is an age of dependency. Iron arrowheads and spearheads become the main measure of strength. This completely changes the balance of power among the native peoples themselves. Tribes with access to trade with the Vinlanders become dominant. They subjugate or displace their neighbors, who still have only stone weapons. Warfare on the continent becomes more fierce. The Vinlanders, without intending to, trigger an arms race. By 1300, they are no longer facing a Stone Age opponent. They are fighting confederacies of tribes who have adopted some of their tactics and fight desperately for every piece of land, using weapons traded from the colonists themselves. Around the 14th century, the tribes that survived the initial shock and adapted to the new reality, likely the ancestors of the Iroquois Confederacy, form a powerful military alliance. In our history, the Iroquois Confederacy was created to end infighting. In this one, it is created to oppose the Vinlanders and control the fur trade with them. They learned not only how to use iron, but also the basics of guerrilla warfare against the Norse settlements. They have no chance in an open battle, but they turn the mark, the borderland, into a scorched earth, making further Norse expansion to the south almost impossible. At the same time, Norse society itself absorbs elements of the New World. A significant stratum of mixedlings, from mixed to mixed, appears. People of mixed blood who often serve as guides, trackers on the frontier, or boatmen on the river vessels. They know the local languages, know how to survive in the forest like the natives, but they carry iron weapons and speak Old Norse. The Vinlanders, in turn, completely ignore Native American crops, corn, potatoes, tomatoes. They consider them savages' food and prefer to grow their familiar rye and barley, missing out on an agricultural revolution. And now imagine that the balance of power in the world has completely changed. By the 14th century, the Western Shore is no longer just a colony, but a recognized, albeit distant, Norse state. It nominally acknowledges the authority of the Norwegian crown, which by this time is united with Denmark and Sweden in the Kalmar Union. But in fact, it is completely independent. Its capital, Vestri Holmgaard, is a major port visited by ships from Iceland, Bergen, and even Bristol. Europe knows of Vinland's existence, but considers it a wild, cold land, valuable only for furs and timber, a sort of northern Siberia. Politically, the Western Shore develops along the Icelandic model. It is not a kingdom, but a free republic, governed by a thing, assembly of free landowners, bondi, and the descendants of the founding jarls. The religious question remains the most acute. Vinland was founded by pagans, and faith in Asatru, the cult of Odin and Thor, became deeply rooted in their identity. But trade with Christian Europe is impossible without contact. The Norwegian Church and later the Papal Throne in Rome see Vinland as the last bastion of paganism and send missionaries there. Churches are built in the port cities. A schism occurs. The cities and the merchant elite accept Christianity, while the rural backcountry remains loyal to the old gods. The main geopolitical change occurs in Greenland. Thanks to the constant supply of grain and timber from Vinland, the Greenland colony does not just survive the Little Ice Age, it thrives. This North Atlantic bridge remains strong. The way to America was never lost. English, Basque, and Portuguese fishermen, hunting for cod, follow the Norse ships and know of the great land to the west. They just see no reason to sail so far north when more familiar waters are available. But the most terrible event of the 14th century is yet to come. In 1347, the Black Death arrives in Europe. The plague wipes out a third to a half of the population. Via trade ships, it reaches Iceland and Greenland. And from there, with the next ship loaded with textiles and iron, it arrives in Vestri Holmgaard. For the Vinlanders, descendants of Europeans, the plague is terrible but familiar. They have some accumulated immunity. They suffer losses, but their society survives. However, from the port cities, the disease moves deep into the continent. It is transmitted along the trade routes of the indigenous peoples who have exchanged goods for centuries. For them, for the Iroquois, for the Mississippian cultures, for all the tribes with no immunity not only to the plague, but also to smallpox, measles, and influenza, which the Vinlanders brought, it is an apocalypse. The Great Dying, which in our history began in 1492, in this timeline begins 150 years earlier. The great city of Cahokia, already in decline, is completely abandoned. Entire regions are depopulated. Let's compare the known outcome with the possible alternative. Where would the paths have diverged by the end of the 15th century? In our history, Christopher Columbus seeks a route to India and finds a new world. In this alternative timeline, Columbus most likely does the same. Knowledge of Vinland in southern Europe, Spain, Portugal, is vague. They consider it a distant, cold northern island, irrelevant to wealthy Asia. Columbus sails south and discovers the Caribbean islands just the same. He returns to Spain in triumph, reporting the discovery of the West Indies. The Spanish rush there. And here they encounter the first major shock. When Hernán Cortés lands in Mexico in 1519, he finds the Aztec civilization. But it is not the powerful empire he expected. The empire is in a state of collapse. The great epidemics, smallpox, measles, plague, which began in Vinland in the 14th century, had slowly but inexorably spread south along the indigenous trade routes. The diseases outpaced the Europeans by 100 years. The Aztecs and Incas meet the conquistadors already devastated, their populations having shrunk by half or two-thirds before first contact with the Spanish. The conquest happens, but it looks different. It is militarily simpler, but Spain receives much less populated and disorganized lands. Meanwhile, a different drama unfolds in the north. England, in the person of John Cabot, and France, in the person of Jacques Cartier, sail west and discover not Stone Age tribes, but the Western Shore. They encounter Europeans, a Norse state that has existed here for 500 years, has its own fleet, an army with iron weapons, and has no intention of submitting to anyone. The colonization of North America in the 16th and 17th centuries becomes not a seizure of empty lands, but a complex geopolitical game. England and France are forced not to fight the native tribes, but to form alliances with the Vinland Jarls and the Iron Confederacy of the Iroquois. The Western Shore becomes a northern Switzerland, a rugged, independent state controlling the strategic river routes and the fur trade. American history from the very beginning becomes a story not of two, but of three European powers, one of which has been native for half a millennium. The history we have considered is only one probability, a logical assumption based on changing a single factor. We did not change technology or introduce miracles. We only suggested that instead of a handful of adventurers, a fleet of political exiles possessing the resources and the will to build a new home set out for Vinland. This demographic push and political motivation became the point of a divergence that changed everything. The survival of the Greenland colony, the permanent North Atlantic bridge, the early spread of Eurasian diseases, and the emergence of a pre-Columbian European state in America, all are consequences of that first wave of migration. In such a world, Columbus would not have discovered the New World. He would have merely established the southern route to a continent that was already known in Northern Europe. The era of the conquista and colonialism, as we know it, simply could not have happened. This scenario reminds us that history is not a predetermined path, but the result of many factors, including demography, logistics, and the political will of specific people who lived 1,000 years ago. The slightest shift in the balance of these forces could have led to a completely unrecognizable present. Subscribe so you don't miss new versions of history.